My name is Emerson Kruger. I'm a planner with the Matsu Borough. I have volunteered to facilitate the first meeting of the subcommittee between the Matsu Borough and the Municipality of Anchorage Assemblies to discuss a regional transit authority. We have a brief presentation that we're going to run through that provides an overview of the Regional Transit Authority plan. I've invited Ann Brooks to come and provide the overview to the assembly members because she was part of the team that put the plan together back in 2011.
That's correct.
Sound about right? So the purpose of the first meeting is just to get the overview of the plan, answer any questions that the assembly members have about the plan, and then talk about where you guys want to go from here. For a potential timeline, just for your consideration, and then I'll turn it over to Ann. Potential timeline to consider, depending on what course of action the subcommittee would like to take. I'd suggest that looking at the next joint assembly meeting in October provides us with a good milestone, and then we can discuss where we'd like to be by October. So at this point, are there any questions about where we're at or what we're going to do for the next about 45 minutes?
No, but I think we should go around the room and make introductions.
Good idea.
You want to start, Emerson?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Emerson. I'm the facilitator for the day.
Ann Brooks of Brooks and Associates.
Paul Honeman, Anchorage Assembly.
Dick Trainee, Anchorage Assembly.
Sherry Easley, I work with Dick Training.
Ron Arvin, Borough Assembly Deputy Mayor.
Steve Culligan, Master Borough Assembly, represent Wasilla.
Amy Domboski, Anchorage Assembly. Okay, we're ready.
Well, with that, we'll launch right into the presentation. We decided just to do it on paper so we can take notes and go through this. The study was completed in 2011. It started in 2010. Our goal was, and the study scope had to do with, we don't have any regional transit authorities or in Alaska. So the municipality of Anchorage, working with the Matsu Borough, got some funding. It was through, I forget, it was essentially funding through the through some of the Obama administration initiative when the market crashed. I'm trying to think of the right terminology. But the idea was to hire somebody who does transit planning specialist. That was RLS and Associates, and they hired me to help them as a local representative. So I helped do some research and some education and outreach. But we wanted to review what the governance and how regional transit authorities were structured, how they're governed, how they're authorized, and then analyze what current services are happening regionally in the area at the time, what their operations were, and then analyze what it would take to put an RTA together. What would the cost be? What would the structure? And then create a plan, which is, as Emerson mentioned, I brought my hard copy of it, and he's got a couple other copies here. People move around the contract through them, and RLS and Associates are transit planners from the Cincinnati, Ohio area, and they do work all over the nation.
And just for the record, we've been joined by Mayor DeVilbiss.
Thank you.
And can we have the folks that are also in the room introduce themselves?
I should say, I took the liberty, since one of the questions that came up when this was formed about the possibility of stops here on the way into Anchorage, so I invited Moki, who is the owner of the People Mover.
Valley Mover?
Valley Mover, yeah.
Yeah, Moki 2 with Valley Mover.
Nice to meet you.
And I'm Jennifer too with Valley.
Nice to meet you.
Eugene Haberman.
I know you.
And you're a resident of, Eugene, you're a resident of the Valley, Matsu?
I investigate City Hall in Anchorage, and I'm a resident of Matsu Valley.
Please, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, so just to start out, what is a regional transit authority? And probably the best way to answer this question, it's basically a regional body that helps provide transit service. And the way the types of services they provide, the types of powers that they have, depends on how you set up the regional transit authority. The case studies that RLS looked at, the regional regional transit authorities had They provided transportation services. They were able to acquire land and facilities for transportation. They were empowered to enter into contracts, issue bonds to pay for service, fund other transportation providers. So, an example could be we set up a regional transit authority, and then Valley Mover receives some of the funding for the structure. The RTA would determine the fares and routes and schedules for those transportation services that they would provide. And then they could apply for grants and loans. There's a lot of Federal Transit Administration grants. Some of them are administered through the State of Alaska Department of Transportation. They could apply for those types of grants. And then they would also be empowered if we choose to go this route to levy taxes and collect fees for the RTA. And then I added at the bottom here, the powers are really determined when the RTA is formed. But one of the things I'll get into a little bit later is we would need, there are two ways we could form the RTA. One is we could have some state enabling legislation that would provide for an RTA. We could have the Anchorage Mat-Su RTA, and then there are a number of transit providers on the Kenai Peninsula. There may be interest in other areas of the state in having a regional authority to provide for public transportation, but a lot of the powers would be determined by in the whole setup, how you set up the RTA.
So, and individually, the Mat-Su and Anchorage would have enabling legislation that creates an RTA, and it's a relationship between the two entities, or is that something that's a state level? Or?
We would need, what we found in the study, we would need enabling legislation at the state level, because a regional transit authority could have almost the same powers as a municipality or a city in terms of levying taxes to pay for the transportation service, and that we don't currently have that legislation in place. And I think when we began our study, Jody Simpson with Senator Huggins' office had drafted some early language moving in that direction, but it's never really gone anywhere. But the advantage of the RTA, you could establish new funding sources. For example, if you did an overlay district in the area and you decided that you were going to have a half a cent, sales tax or some kind, or capture a part of license fees or gasoline tax in an area, then that would be a new source that could be added. You could provide new transit service. The RTA could be established just to provide a new service. Commuter rail could be an example of a new service. They could handle the grants administration, procurement, and other functions. They can operate the new service, and then they would then coordinate with all the other providers. We'll get into the recommendations a little bit more, and I'll get into that coordination option. The disadvantage of an RTA, creating one requires some action, and this is getting back to your question, Armin. At the state level, we would need the enabling legislation to create an RTA. And then developing a funding source for public transportation. Now, currently, People Mover's probably the major provider in the area. Valley Movers come on board, but I think People Mover's predominantly funded by sales tax or by property tax in the municipality of Anchorage. They get some grant funds. Typically, Transit gets capital funding from the Federal Transit Administration, but the operation funding has to come from local. Historically, the state has just in the last 3 or 4 years actually put some general fund dollars into public transportation, and I think it's right at $2 million, and I don't know if they've requested any more than that.
It's one right now, and it's really at 1.5.
Okay. Thank you. And then at the local level, you would need to create agreements amongst the local governments. So the Mat-Su and the borough would then create some agreements for how you would handle the RTA. And that type of, those types of agreements could begin almost immediately without the enabling legislation, if there were advantages to having those agreements in place to begin coordination, those kinds of services.
And to be clear, you said FTA gives money for something but not operation. Can you say that again?
They typically,
Capital.
they'll typically fund capital, so they'll help you.
Purchase of a bus,
They won't
or
do
fix a
operation.
building, or maintenance costs.
Yeah, and I think we get like almost like we get with road, some of the road projects, we get 90% federal funding and 10%, there needs to be a local match. And Anchorage has been matching that local match with a bond for public transportation. And then at the local level, then you figure out your own local funding mechanisms.
Is Anchorage's bond revenue bond or voter?
They're voter-approved
Voter-approved.
bonds, and they're on, I'm sure Paul and Dick can elaborate, but they're, when they know they need new vehicles, they'll float a bond. So you don't see a public transportation bond every single year, but when they know they need to enhance their fleet. So to prepare the study, what we did was look at, RLS looked at other multi-jurisdictional transit entities to determine, what were their operating and funding structures. How were they operated? Some of them they didn't provide any service at all. They were just a management kind of entity. But we looked at Sound Transit in Seattle. If you've been to Seattle and you've taken the train from the airport to downtown, Sound Transit operates that. It goes through several municipalities getting from the airport to downtown, so there's a whole cooperation there. Chicago is another RTA. We looked at Cleveland. The list is here. Here's some of the things we found that was interesting about their funding structures in particular. Right now, Sound Transit gets a 0.3% motor vehicle tax and a 0.4% sales tax. That's what they're using to operate the service in Seattle. Chicago's RTA gets funding from a regional RTA sales tax and state public transportation funds and City of Chicago real estate transfer tax. So they must collect their real estate and then transfer some of that proportionally to Chicago's RTA. Ohio has a 1% regional sales tax to fund the transit, and that's been in place since like 1975, and it's basically been unchanged, but there's a 1%. The Nevada Regional Transportation Commission receives a 0.3%, so just under 0.5% sales tax in Clark County only to fund them. And then Virginia, the Virginia Transportation Authority collects funds from a bunch of different agencies. So there's, the funding options are as broad as you could want to consider.
So do any of these examples include privately run transportation efforts, or are these all public?
The ones we looked at were all public, but typically in our experience with transit, there are private partners that work cooperatively with the public partners. And some of those examples, I did some work on the Kenai Peninsula and Frontier Community Services is a human service provider, and they run buses that serve their clients, vans or buses, and so, but they cooperate with the larger entities so they can meet different longer distance trips that may be provided by their CATs, I think it is down there. There were a couple different operating alternatives. There's the non-operating overlay district. This would be at sort of a management level, coordinating everything. They wouldn't actually operate a service, but they'd help coordinate everything. There's an overlay district with new transit service. This is the one that was actually recommended. The idea would be we would create an overlay district that would encompass Mat-Su and Anchorage. We'd find some way to levy, some way to create some funds from that overlay district, and then we would start new service with that. So all the existing providers, Valley Mover, People Mover, Mascot, Cats, Sunrise, Sunshine, would continue to operate, but there'd be an overlay entity that would coordinate between those. You can consolidate services, and to consolidate services means the RTA then consolidates all the transit providers under one umbrella. That really wasn't where our RLS thought that we should start with consolidation. And there's making the RTA division of an existing agency. So if you said, okay, people mover, you've got all this infrastructure in place, you've got all this staff in place, why don't we just add the operations to your suite of tasks?
Why wouldn't consolidation be on the table at the beginning of the discussion?
Initially, probably because it would be very complex to do that, and we're geographically strung out, but portions of it, and Lemerson and I were talking about this yesterday, portions of operations could be consolidated. For example, we know that People Mover has a wonderful maintenance garage, and and they've got a lot of maintenance personnel. It may be that they could assist with maintenance on with another facility. So it would be one of those things that you could work out. And some of it has to do with how they're currently getting funding. I think there's a level of complexity that initially you may get to that. At some point in your evolution as an RTA, you may get to consolidate the services for reasons, but you may want to start out smaller. I think that was RLS's initial thinking. So what they did recommend was this overlay district with new transit services, and the thought was they'd create it would be multi-jurisdictional, Mat-Su and Anchorage. The existing services remain as are currently structured. And you'd bring in a new funding source to provide, and the services that we were looking at would be commuter rail between Mat-Su and Anchorage, a bus rapid transit route which would go from downtown to South Anchorage. That would I think it was slated to run on the C Street corridor, and it would just provide really short headways. It would operate every 30 minutes or every 15 minutes in that corridor, and the other routes would feed into it, and it would enhance service in Anchorage. And then the commuter express, which is what actually Moki is providing with Valley Mover currently between Anchorage and the Mat-Su. The next page talks about the functional responsibilities, and these are in that analysis of the other entities. These are the types of services that the RTA provides. Initially, the RTA would have management and control over the new service. They would do the planning for the new service. They would do grants administration, they'd have finance and personnel, procurement and marketing and legal for the new service. But this is, again, goes back to the question about consolidation. If you've got a legal department that knows how to deal with transit issues, there may be, it may be you could shift that, consolidate that piece of it into the RTA, but it's one of those things to consider as you move forward. Because you just look at this chart, there would be some duplication of effort, and so it probably would make sense in the long haul to consolidate, but it may be pretty complex to go to that from the get-go. The implementation steps that RLS recommended was immediately they suggested that we propose the RTA State of Alaska enabling legislation. To my knowledge, that hasn't begun yet. And one of the things that's in the appendices of this report is tons of samples of enabling legislation, so from other states. So, one of the things that you could do is get the legal department to start looking at that and start thinking about what works in our, in conjunction with our state constitution rules. Voice the local support. Get the local support for it. If there's enabling legislation that has to go through the legislature, then you definitely would want support for that. Seek that legislative action. So if we were to get the legislative action and it passes, then the other steps would be creating the memorandum of understanding between the two jurisdictions, drafting some bylaws for the RTA. Each entity, the municipality and the borough, would need to pass a resolution approving the startup funding. So that would be, you determine what the funding source would be, and then you'd authorize that funding. You'd appoint a board of direction, and then sort of convene meetings to get all of the pieces in place for your RTA. So it would take a lot of discussions on what you're operating, how you're gonna establish the RTA, who's gonna be on the board of direction, and that sort of thing. If you don't proceed with the legislation, there's nothing to stop you immediately from creating some intermunicipal agreements and setting up a nonprofit to begin to provide regional transit service. That's another avenue that can be taken. And one of those nonprofit organizations in the room, Valley Movers, operating as a nonprofit. Just to quickly summarize the regional transit services that are in place, we've got the V-Ride, which is the Share a Ride program. Share a Ride is the municipal name, V-Ride is the organization that's providing the services on behalf of the municipality. We've got Valley Mover, People Mover. Anchor Rides is a service for seniors and people with disabilities. You have to have that service if you have a fixed route service. So People Mover has to have Anchor Rides if they want to receive federal transit administration funding. Matsu Community Transit operates in the valley. Chickaloon Public Transit Service, CATS, has just begun operation primarily between Chickaloon and Palmer, and they link with Mascot. Sunshine Transit is operating out of Talkeetna. And then we've all heard in the last 6 or 4 months, I guess, we've heard about the railroad potential commuter rail pilot project. And I guess Emerson, I've heard it's on hold. They need a funding source for it, so it's on hold, but it's been something that's been considered for some time. As I understand it, the pilot would operate in the winter, say November to May, at the end of their tourist passenger season, between the tourist passenger season and the spring and fall.
The Railroad Corporation Vice President was asked to put together a package on how they would stand up a pilot, and so they were going great guns on developing a pilot project for commuter rail, and they hit the brakes when Flint Hills announced that they were shutting down. And so over the last 3 weeks, their tone has changed significantly over how they're moving forward with commuter rail.
Well, they hit the brakes with positive train control.
Costs them a lot of money.
Yeah, so there's several vectors there that are pointing on target.
Yeah.
Was that Jim Gambitz that was doing that study?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the handouts, just to pause here a moment, one of the handouts was a fact sheet from the Railroad Corporation's website titled Commuter Opportunities. And if you look at the upper left-hand corner of page 2, you kind of get the quick gist as to why it's on the table for this particular subcommittee. I mean, I'm pretty quick to point at commuter rail, but if you talk to anybody with the Railroad Corporation and you ask them what does it take to make commuter rail work, they'll tell you we need an RTA.
You also need convenience.
Need a source of funding.
Yep.
I attended the last Board of Directors meeting for the National Railroad Corporation and explained that, of course, the Matsu Borough has already presented a resolution and passed and supported it. And we actually have one, I've got it drafted here. After talking with them, I wanted to make sure that since we were meeting soon, so much more quickly than before presenting it to our body for resolution. I'd asked for some ideas, suggestions, and what they saw as challenges, and you're absolutely right. They're concerned about funding sources. And Councilman Hill was mentioned positive trade control. There's some expenses that they're not in control of. And we already know that the state's saying budget deficit. So it doesn't look positive in that regard. And I guess I'll wait till the end of your presentation.
We can get into that a little bit more. The next slide talks about who benefits from the Mat-Su-Anchorage RTA. Probably the biggest group that would benefit are the folks that are traveling, currently commuting between the two communities. The DOT, or actually regionally, we could benefit because we might be able to decrease or delay any additional investment on the Glen Highway. And I'll give you some numbers in a minute. But wear and tear on the roads, there's a pretty high crash rate on the Glen Highway. I'm working on a project talking about Brake Light Hill. I didn't realize that was so aptly named until I, doing a lot of traveling between communities. But there's some improvements there. The next slide talks about the providers by type of service, and I just wanted to bring this out to highlight the different types of service that transit provides. Valley Movers basically has an intercity bus going on right now. The RTA would cover that intercity travel. People Mover operates the fixed route, and as I mentioned before, the fixed route is tied to their Anchor Rides service for seniors and seniors and people with disabilities. And then the Mascot, Sunshine, Soaring Eagle, Transit, and Anchor Rides all offer demand response route deviation, and that means somebody calls to schedule a ride. Sometimes they have fixed routes, but they are able to deviate from those routes to pick up a particular passenger and move through. And then the ride sharing, ride and carpool. The Soaring Eagle is service that's provided in the Copper River Valley, and it goes to and from Palmer, Anchorage, and Valdez. So it's operating sort of in the northern quadrant of the borough. Currently, if you go to the next page, I just pulled some numbers off the state's website. We've got 53,000 average daily trips on the Glen Highway at Arctic Valley Road, and give you an idea of the volume of people coming into Anchorage. V-Ride has 972 passengers as of the end of 2013, so the end of December. Valley Movers operating the 15 trips a day. Moki, you're right around 500 riders a day coming in. And then People Mover in the Bowl and with service to Eagle River is providing about 3 million trips a year. 4 million. And then there's 175,000 trips happening on Anchor Rides, so that's seniors and people with disabilities.
175,000.
175,000.
Is this V-Ride the share van
Yes.
program?
Mhm. And so if you look at those numbers in terms of if each one of those riders was in a single occupancy vehicle, and you just look at V-Ride and Valley Mover, I mean, we're looking at 1,500 people, 1,500 vehicles, single occupancy vehicles that are no longer on the Glen Highway, and that's a pretty huge number. Just looking at who funds the current services, again, I pulled this off the various providers' websites, but it's everything from the Department of Transportation through state legislative grants, Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, and then there's this incredible mix of United Way, the borough, the communities, community councils. Sunrise gets funding from Talkeetna Community Council and some other councils.
Yeah, what's interesting about this would be to boil this down to the unique providers of funding, because there's a lot of here that are triple, quadruple counted as it passes through. Either from a federal, particularly in tribe, I don't think puts personal funds in. It comes through agency, then through Mat-Su gives money to Mat-Su Health Foundation and matches. It'd be interesting to find out the actual real source and the quantity and how it migrates through either private or public transit would be interesting.
Yeah.
analysis so we can understand.
Well, and,
This list is probably more like 6 or 7.
Yeah, that's it, because I can tell you the Health and Human Services grant it's 70% state money. We match 30%. That community council thing is state money through the communities.
It's not negative, it's just that as we heard the
Right.
cats, it's nice to know where the real food source is and how it really gets divvied up amongst our communities and
Yeah.
what it means or turns into.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And then the other person that's paying a portion of the service is the fares. People are paying the fares for the service, and there isn't a public transit provider in the nation that doesn't see some subsidy. Other cost savings, this was interesting. I actually pulled some of this off of Moki's website, but if you look at the 500 trips that Valley Mover's providing on the Glen and make an assumption, and I think it's probably higher, that your personal savings, if you look at the gas that you're not buying and the wear and tear on your car that you're not incurring if you're riding the bus, at $11,500 per year, there's basically 5.7 million per year that's available to spend elsewhere in the economy. You know, so there's some benefit there. And then the other point was that you could delay and reduce or eliminate the need for infrastructure development, which leads me to the current Metropolitan Transportation Plan for Anchorage shows 2 projects on the Glen Highway to add high occupancy vehicle lanes that total $126 million. And that's in 2010 dollars, so we know that's probably escalating beyond that. But that is the projects that are on the books right now.
To address congestion.
To address future congestion, you know, looking out at population growth through 2035. So that's investment. If we invest in the transit authority, we may be able to delay that. And then there's other regional connections that we're going to be paying money for. And this, you know, this speaks to competing for federal highway dollars on a regional level. If you can delay some if you can delay some projects on the Glen Highway, potentially that money might be available for other projects, regionally significant projects like improvements to connect Goose Bay Road and some other things. So it was just important to put it in there for thought. And that's kind of very quickly what I had to provide for you. We do have some more information if you wanted to get into the details of what the RTA study actually recommended in terms of service, but I thought this was, for the first get-together, this might be a good place to stop and have a discussion.
I don't know who's keeping track of these.
Go ahead, Paul.
Facilitate input.
He is.
Jump in a bit.
I'll just jump in.
Well, I'm excited. First of all, I'm excited about the opportunity to look with a different set, maybe fresh set, for lack of better terms, set of eyes, because I think we're all aware that there's some significant challenges coming in the future, probably longer than we'll even be here. And it's wise to think, I don't want to say think big, but think of some fiscally prudent and responsible projects and steps to make it better for the future of everybody in both sets of the regions, if you will, from South Central. My only wish is obviously between here and Kenai also we have a little more input from them, because you know, that Girdwood stretch and the Seward Highway is pretty lethal, and particularly the winter months. You know, we've got a lot of problems with people trying to commute down to the valley or down to the Kenai Peninsula summer and winter, and we lose a ton of people out there. They're usually pretty high speed car crashes, and it's pretty narrow for the most part. But you know, when it comes to challenges, one of the challenges I'll just throw out there on the table, I know that you guys will probably see or hear the same comments I will, is not that it isn't something that's necessary, but to give a regional transit authority taxing ability to levy taxes, I'm talking a tax period, is going to get a significant pushback, at least from Anchorage. I will say the valley has a sales tax, so your residents are used to paying.
A couple of the cities do, but the borough does not.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Palmer, Wasilla, they all have some sort of tax, sales tax going on, and I spend there when I go there. But Anchorage doesn't, as you were well, we keep getting it turned down at the polls. Giving an authority and a taxing ability isn't gonna set very well, and we have a challenge we'll definitely have to overcome locally to a 60% plus one. I mean, it takes 60% of the voters.
Actually, not quite, Paul. They can be written differently.
Could be.
I got one written differently.
Mr.
It
Tree
can be
is
written
quite
differently.
creative when it comes to taxing.
But I will say
Agrees
that,
with me, ma'am.
I will say that, you know, where I think we may have some success is if we can get state legislation that allows, you know, you're spot on some of the thoughts I had just put down. There's part of a gas tax, maybe part of the motor vehicle tax, you know, add on in the valley and in Anchorage that can be, you know, passed through the bill on the state level where they do the collections and turn it back to the RTA. I mean, those are things that people are gonna pay the renewal, and if you add another dollar on there, they're really not gonna pay much attention to that. I mean, they're gonna complain, but it's gonna go right back to the RTA. Same with the gas pump. You know, people are used to seeing sticker shock at the gas pump, and a penny or a couple of pennies isn't gonna really make a big difference. But I think we can gotta understand that there's a challenge right there in and of itself to try to get funding. This commuter rail thing is a positive. It's a plus to try. I mean, the cars are there, the tracks are there. It's just about for the money. And I don't know where we're gonna start. I mean, if we can get Lisa Murkowski or somebody that can give us some federal bucks, maybe kick in a few state dollars, we all know it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
So to add on to that, I very much appreciate the comments. We're in the Matsu, and I won't speak for the mayor, but kind of in the same boat. When we looked at just you know, we failed at a sales tax twice here recently. One is a kind of an area-wide that would offset property tax, but it couldn't be guaranteed. That was problem number one. Liquor license tax to help for our SART teams, some other things, also failed. Couldn't be guaranteed that would go against lowering their other taxes. That was some PR issues we suffered. Number one, it's good to talk about these avoided and other costs, but what I don't see is what are the costs? What are the direct costs of the organization and the overhead? And we need to be honest amongst our groups what that is going in and how that might grow, or what are the different organizational structures. And we, I think, agreed, at least when I was at the table, to form this group. I wanted us to start talking about transportation period and kind of have a dashboard, so to speak, of the different transportation projects that are in our purview, and start ranking or looking at them and analyzing what the advantages, the cost, and the problems are. So rail has been identified as one thing that would be a great thing, but on the dashboard, it's something that has a different timeline and funding source compared to other things. We have the bridge, we have improvements to the Glen Highway, we have improvements in Anchorage and major corridors to get from the Glen to south to Girdwood. We have, you know, within the valley, we have KGB. You know, we're building the epicenter of government in Palmer, but all of the population growth is north of Wasilla. It's not even Wasilla, it's north of Wasilla, and kind of building out in the corridor between Palmer and Wasilla. So it'd be nice to start thinking, and it's good to talk about the but it'd be nice to have a dashboard acknowledging what our priorities are in each community, and kind of summarize what the different plans are, the funding and the prioritization of those are as well. This is going to take a little while to move to, but we need to know what the costs are, the organizational structures, what the commitments are, and the limitations. It would be great if, you know, on the one hand, that if it could receive federal funding and the like, but you said we're going to have you will have problems in Anchorage, we will have an upheaval in the Matsu.
Oh, you will in Eagle River too.
Unless it is directly tied to somehow to an offset, and it's guaranteed that it's going to lower their taxes somewhere. So I mean, I'll just start it with that.
I agree, and I guess I'd kind of like to hear a little from the nonprofit business side. People Mover, the books are open. You know what it costs us, you know where the money's coming from and how it gets spent. I don't know what the Valley Mover from a nonprofit side would, and I'm not sure if you're even willing to say, but basically we don't know what a new entity would cost. I mean, we can get some estimates of what diesel fuel is and what the train car, if we were doing that. But there are a lot of synergies. I can, in my mind, I visualize these, you're talking about these we don't have mass transit and we don't have rapid transit. And I think that's the fatal flaw for this whole thing. People want to get somewhere now, and they look at and they ridicule buses that have 2 or 3 buses in it when they're going through some of these subdivisions. So you're taking 40 and 45-foot buses going through subdivisions with half a dozen people on it, except for 70 or 80. I don't know how many people fit on a bus anymore. But, I know the Valley Mover does a good job of stacking and packing the buses in as they're coming. But, we're running, I think we could do a lot more with private partnership, nonprofit, small shuttles, running people from neighborhoods out to the fast track, 15-minute runs back and forth, so that people can get there quicker.
So if you look at our school buses, we engineer school buses, delivery based on the total students, and most people drive their kids to school nowadays, and the Matsu, and a lot of those buses are empty. So it'd be interesting how all that played into it.
Mr. Trainee, did you have something?
Just that I watched your alcohol tax issue. The biggest problem you guys had was you couldn't dedicate the fund stream. So people were saying, how could you guarantee that money is going for that? I would argue with you that if you wrote it correctly, that you dedicated the fund stream, that would have passed up there.
And the problem is, we legally can't.
Legally you can, according to our city attorney.
Yeah, according to our charter and our attorney, it's not the case.
According to ours, you can.
We're not a first-class
Yeah,
city.
right, because we're different, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if we ever have one,
Different forms of government.
if we ever have one, believe me, it would be a dedicated fund stream to things like detox, to the homeless pickup that we do,
Yeah.
that she pushes.
That may be a
But
reason
we've
for us
got
to be a
push it.
first-class
We've got to
borough.
dedicate the fund stream, but you guys are right. You talk about the RTA having taxing authority, and all the red flags in Anchorage go up, as will the Matsu. Because we don't let the school district tax. So you say we're gonna have RTA, people are gonna say, why and what is it? And what's the restraints on it?
So in our differences here, I think that's part of the problem of being a second-class borough versus a first-class city or whatever. And that may be, we've had other discussions that, that other designation may have other benefits, depending on some of the other things we're dealing with. Road powers, we've got all sorts of fire and road powers and ambulance services coming up. And when it comes to direct costs, funding this versus, we've got the school coming at us this budget, and we've got ambulance, with some other big ticket items that we're.
That's almost, if I can, that's almost the second part of the discussion in my thinking. The first hurdle that has to be cleared, and these are some astounding numbers. I didn't actually know that so many people were writing. But when you talk about a survey that you did to the military, and 1,000 sent, 150 replied, and of those, almost all of them said great. Well, this isn't going to rest economically on the back of 150 users, even coupled with the ridership that you have with respect to the commuter train I'm talking. And so when you talk about neighborhood pickups and connectivity to the bus systems that are in place, that seems to me to be the first step, right? I mean, there was an argument for a long time, well, run a ferry between Anchorage and Port McKenzie, figure out your ridership, and then we'll use that data for the construction initiative for the bridge, right? There's an argument to be made for that with moving people. And FTA, that's their business. So there's a huge amount of money that's available there. It's not that difficult to get. Prior leadership in the borough, in the Matsu borough, did it to the tune of tens of millions of dollars for this MV Susitna debacle, right? So, I mean, it's almost like they're throwing money out, but you have to move people. And there certainly are people being moved.
I will tell you though, from an Anchorage perspective, the Anchorage mayors never bought into the ferry. I worked with 5 mayors, none of them ever had a plan to have the ferry land in Anchorage. And that was part of the problem. You guys on Matsu were planning, hey, we're gonna do this ferry, we're gonna build it, but Anchorage, to a man, never planned it. No, Wirtz did not. I worked with him. He never planned for it to land anywhere.
Well, the landing was all, I mean, that's kind of probably a side discussion,
Sure.
but
Well, you have to have someplace to put it up.
yeah. hey, look, you can read the minutes, I'm not a big fan of the ferry. So.
No, but it would have been an interesting start if it had worked.
Right,
But I know every time I talk to Sheffield, he always said, we're not letting it land here.
right.
Guys, I'd like to interject.
Sorry.
We're about up to the end time of our meeting. So I had one more question, and then I'd like the group to discuss what you'd like to talk about at your next meeting, so that as staff, we have some time to get some things prepared, when you'd like to meet and where you'd like to meet. Mr.
Well,
Honeyman?
and that was where I was kind of heading next, and that is, I would like to talk about, let's look at it from my perspective. Let's explore this statewide legislative authority, through the state level, where it pertains to particularly revenues. Let's look at some of the areas where it's very likely that we could be successful. Again, the motor vehicle registration revenue source, or alcohol or gas tax, or ethyl alcohol, and then the perhaps nonprofit. It's contrasted to say the nonprofit side. If we can't be successful governmentally, do we entrust a nonprofit, where we all know nonprofits doesn't mean they can't make money at it. It just their books are a little different, and perhaps that's the potential answer there. Get us started. We do need to start, and I think you're right, Nick. We need to start. Someplace to start.
I agree with you, but we need to get this started, and we need to figure out some at the state level that can champion this thing. It's gonna have to get through the Senate and the House and then on to the governor. We need to figure out how this thing's gonna operate. But we have one person here that rides the bus every day, Cher. And we have yet to hear from somebody like Cher that rides every day from Matsu into Anchorage. So how was the experience?
I do it because I work for these guys. And Paul was kind enough to ask me some thoughts and opinions, and I really appreciate that, because like Dick said, we are the ones that have to write that report. And I will say, the dwelling mover, as far as I'm concerned, and you gave me that, I have one of these that I work with. And it's us that ride the buses, and I tried different times of the day, and it's the same. Every time I go now, it's getting fuller, there's more people on the bus, and there is very happy people on the bus. It's not a government thing that we use, it's a private. It's people that are in the valley, people that live in the valley and then use something that is run by somebody in the valley. That's what it's all about. And and it's nothing against this group or the whole thing about this discussion of these folks taking it's a government. And I think if you put that, or if you even said that to the people that ride the bus every day, us on the bus, oh my God, these people that are doing the buses right now are doing great. And especially just the small thing about the rail study and the pilot study, and learning a little bit, like said when we went to that railroad meeting, and they started talking about, sure, let's do this little pilot study and let's put people on this pilot train. It sounded really good. It's like a big train. We can take a lot of people. We even have a bathroom on the train. Whoa, that's pretty cool. It goes faster. Most of those people, and this whole survey was given to the people in the military, not the ones of us that ride the bus. A lot of these people already use the minivans. But, okay, I think I've made the opinion about people that ride the bus pretty full, and I don't I don't think it would even make any kind of sense to have anybody spend their time, like you guys, very important, without having people that ride the bus as part of the group. Thank you, Dick. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Sharon.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I would like to see us use the approach that was raised where we begin with intermunicipal agreements that help what's already working. And I thought that's what we were going to be talking about today, frankly. It's no secret, I'm not a advocate of public transportation, publicly subsidized public transportation. one of the first things I got when I became mayor was this legislation that Senator Huggins had, and I read that and realized the state had the ability to slap a taxing authority right over top of us. And I said, well, I'm not gonna support that. And so it has sat there. That's one way to get around having our constituents vote on it, but it's chicken's way out as far as I'm concerned. I have always contended when the free market conditions are right, the private sector will move in and make it work. We just need to try and help coordinate, and I've given my support to, working on that level as much as I can.
Yeah, I was just gonna clarify, I think if the state could allow the RTA, could form an RTA and allow that overlay taxation, but the taxation itself couldn't occur without a vote of the local folks. So you could create the
Okay,
district, but the
well-
local folks would still need to vote on it.
I have a quick question for Moki. Currently, your service doesn't stop in Eagle River, does it?
Yes.
It does? Is this what I'm seeing at 7:40 a.m.?
Yeah, it says Eagle River on the, should say Eagle River.
It says
on
Eagle River at UAA, but I wasn't sure where your pickup is. Do you pick up?
Eagle River is, if you want to be picked up down at the transit center in Eagle River, you
Uh-huh.
just make the call and we stop there.
Oh.
Otherwise, we don't drive all the way down there and do that, but we do stop at the school regardless, because we bring students back and forth.
The UAA portion.
Oh, you mean at UAA? Oh, at
Tutors.
Jack White Building?
Yeah, the big white building.
Yeah, Jack White Building. Okay.
My
Yeah.
daughter rides that bus. She goes to middle college. She rides her bus every.
Well, and that's the one thing I
What's
hear.
happening?
Yeah, that's one thing I hear from Eagle River residents when, because we only have a couple routes from the people mover that go in and they say, well, we don't have very much opportunity. So that's why I thought, if we, expanded on your service that's already existing, that's a nonprofit, I would be very comfortable going that route. Yet again, I'm very comfortable with Valley Cab servicing Eagle River too, but that's another issue. But one thing, a point of clarity, I would like to just say, adding on to what Mr. Colligan said, I personally think it's a great idea for us as communities, prioritize, our transportation projects and kind of come together and say, okay, how can we do this? And I think it would probably be good homework for Anchorage delegation and the Mat-Su delegation to kind of talk amongst each other and then come back together. And maybe together as a team, we can kind of say, okay, this would be mutual beneficial and we can kind of attack it that way.
Yep.
But I personally, just moving forward, I think it would be a good idea to have some sort of leadership structure on this board. So I personally would think it'd be a good idea to have 2 co-chairs, one from Anchorage, one from the Valley. And if the group is amenable, I would recommend Mr. Honeman and Mr. Colligan to be our co-chairs.
I had one, final question. I really appreciated the comments from the writer, but it raises the question of, do we collectively need to do a broader survey in support of some of this that has the crosstabs of the different types of users and what their real interests are? And I'm not sure to what extent, maybe there's a comment of what was done under the RTPO or the Regional Transportation Survey versus us trying to answer some other questions that would look at the private transportation in the valley as well as other users and the military, and have enough questions that we can get crosstabs to isolate those different user groups, and maybe the private sector or whatever, we could address those issues more strategically, but based on that knowledge. That might be a good investment from both sides, and have one survey done so that it's not apples and oranges, that we have a common picture of people running the private or the actual people commuting.
That's a great idea. I think Mr. Arman.
Yeah, so one of the questions on what Steve just said, right, is oftentimes after the fact, you find out things don't really play out like you planned, right? And I think the fundamentals of the topic get lost early sometimes, because one focuses on whether or not we could do it versus whether or not we should do it, right? And on the commuter rail, The concept is fantastic. I've spent an inordinate amount of time in large, worldwide metropolitan areas where they have rail, rapid transit, and commuter bus systems that run so efficiently. I actually had a contract one time where I had a car service, never used it. Never got on the road because the rapid transit systems were so efficient. The ridership is huge. They are heavily subsidized, make no mistake. I actually don't know of any that are not. There probably is, but so I don't want to lose that in the conversation either. There are, whether it's a private nonprofit, private operation versus a government managed, they're all subsidized at some level. And having that discussion and the community understanding that that's the deal going into it, because some things are sold where they will stand on their own 2 feet and they don't. And the ferry is the perfect example of that. That was sold first as a self-sustaining operation. We know.
Kind of like setting the bridge across, doesn't it?
So I guess it's in that context. So the first part of the discussion again, and I'm not one for repeating, but I think it's so important on this. How many people are going to use it and how much is it going to cost? With defensible, detailed information, not a back of the napkin kind of a thing, with surveys and public outreach and a vibrant conversation. And if the survey shows, then yeah, it'll make sense. But having, butts in the seats is the deal at the end of the day. And I would question whether or not that is a viable conclusion today. I commute to Anchorage every day. The connectivity is a challenge. I can't get to where I need to go to in Midtown without it taking me, frankly, on your system, which I looked at. I can commute it in 50 minutes. It takes me an hour and a half to get there with connectivity. So those are my comments.
Can I just make one more thing about is that what I did is because I know after you had called me and told me about this group that was going to be coming is that every time I've gotten on the bus for the last, since we set up the meeting for the second time, and I do sit with somebody and I do ask them, and I have like 40 minutes to talk to them on the way in, which sometimes they don't want to, they want to go back to sleep, but they will, some of them will sit down and they will talk to me about all of these details, like you said. And I think that is actually one of the best ideas if you're going to find out about people that are using it. And I hear that if you talk to somebody for a while, and more than just it costs too much, or because I also go to the university as well, or did when I'm not working, and I go to the university, but when I get to town on one of those buses, then you have to sit there and wait half an hour, 45 minutes for the next bus to get you to the university. So yeah, that is an issue. But that's like I'm saying, there's all these little details that you don't think about if you don't ride the bus, and if you don't drive it, I'm sure too. But all these little things that do happen.
So my last comment would be, actually, I wanted to touch on what the mayor talked about. But I believe it's convenience over cost. People are willing to pay for having a convenience. And if that connectivity and the logistics is worked out and is presented as a seamless program, I think cost moves away from the discussion a little bit as far as ridership cost, the fee to the user. So convenience over cost, I think, is paramount in the discussion. And then I fully agree. If we don't, you have it here, if the legislature fails, you have this as create an intermunicipal agreement. We should be doing that now. We have reasons to have that now. And that may be a catalyst to move the discussion along at a higher level. So.
Well, there's a couple things. One thing I wanted to...
We've got about 50 seconds.
Oh, 50 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I will, there's opportunities available right now to include the RTA in the discussions that are happening on the long-range transportation plan updates. And to be just, roll that in. And Anchorage hasn't started theirs, and it's like the consultant that is coming. I know Emerson's just to talk about the regional travel in that. I know Anchorage is planning on doing a head of household survey, so I don't know if we can ask RTA questions on that, but it's something that we could go back to staff and find out if you could, but, because it's basically trying to determine travel characteristics for people to help refine our travel demand model. So those might be two opportunities. The other thing I'll say is, I don't know if you guys know this, but we put $85 million annually into the ferry system in Southeast Alaska, serving a fraction of the population. I don't know if that's anywhere you want to go, but when you look at the federal statistics, the reporting, it'll say public transportation in Alaska, $85 million of funding, and
Pennies per mile versus $10 a mile.
yeah, so just
Be careful now, I'm born and
thing.
raised in Sitka now, that's our
That's
highway.
why
Well, I know, it's
That's why we mentioned
it's a
it.
really
Right,
hot
that's good.
topic.
Well, okay, so, watching the time here, we've started right at about an hour ago, so we probably should close since we publicly noticed for that. And I would just close by challenging everyone to think about it. What is our mission as a committee? What are we trying to attain? And I guess the end of it would be, are we trying to target, would you say 50,000 riders a day?
1,500.
1,500. So what is our percentage? Are we trying to, 10%, 20% of the reduce the traffic flow and the amount of vehicles on the highways or something like that?
That's 5%, there's some 30,000 trips a day, right?
Yeah. Oh, Paul Moakey.
It's
would like
safety
to-
factor.
Mr.
You
Tews would
gotta
like to
probably
make
do
Sure.
those
comment.
every year.
Could I chime in a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, we are a nonprofit business, but our books are wide open to anybody. Our business, I do not draw a paycheck out of Valley Mover. I started Valley Mover for the reasons of helping the community. So we have about an 85% fill rate on our bus. So that means when we're bringing the people from the valley to Anchorage, they're about 85% full. Now, when they come home, or when we bring the buses back, that's when you see very few riders. So it's just like the highway in the morning. The highway is really packed going into Anchorage, then the other way. But then it turns around and goes back the other way. Addressing the deal about Midtown, what we do in our little formula right now, what we're trying to do is take a bus, we call it the UMed district, and actually go from the valley right down to the UMed district, because we do hear that. The people do not want to get on our bus because it does take another hour to go from downtown just to the middle of town. So what we're trying to do now is run a couple of buses right down to the UMed district, go through the one hospital by the airport, come down Lake
Regional,
Otis,
then
go to the other.
Providence. Regional, go to Providence.
Yeah, exactly. And we have spoke to those folks down there, they'll fill the buses right up. But it does take funding. Right now, I think currently the funding from what we get is FTA funding. They provide $1 million in the whole valley, so all the providers share that $1 million. What we take from that, I think, is under 500,000, and then the rest is by fares. And it takes about $1 million. I think, Jennifer, is that right? About $1 million a year is what our budget is.
Well, it's just under $1 million. Like a national average of fares is about 10 to 15% is cover the cost of the public transit, but ours is at 25%. We also get advertising income, which 100% of our advertising income goes back into the operations. And then we do a lot of contracts. So we have a contract with ConocoPhillips, I saw was on the list, Matsu School District, UAA, Job Corps, South Central. So all of those contracts are making up for why we don't have the local match. That's how we survive.
And a couple other, the railroad. I met with the railroad last year. They seen my little blurb in the newspaper about our 3-year deal, so they wanted to have a meeting with me. I went down and met with them, and we discussed kind of like a little plan of making the Kenai building a transit committee, building for like all the providers can put people in there, just like you guys have downtown on Fifth Avenue. And I think the train's a wonderful idea, but I think it's going to take years to get there. And I think that we, Valley Mover, and all the other transit companies need to partner with the train to get all the people trained to go to the train depot, to get on the train, and then at the same time, the train when they drop them off in Anchorage, man, right now they have nothing.
Yeah.
They have absolutely nothing. That's kind of like the ferry. Okay, let's buy $1 million
You're getting out of the
ferry,
port.
and then here we go. So, but I do believe that the train is the ultimate, that's what's gonna happen. So once we get like all these buses going up and down the highway, and we're going, why do we have a bus right on top of the bumper of another bus? That's when the train needs to come in, and then it'll be viable for them too. It won't be such a financial drain to do that. And there's a lot of reasons to have the train, way more reasons to have it than not. So, I don't know, that's my input from your guys' discussion going in here. I hope I answered some of
All
it.
this to ask on behalf of the committee, can we count on you for some future input or?
Oh, absolutely, whatever I can do to help, and if you guys need to see our books, I'd be more than happy to show you our books. We do run a really tight ship. There's not a lot of, if government got involved in my business and got me out, the budget would just go, you know, it's crazy how it would fly. If you think of the service that we're providing now, and we're doing it for less than $1 million, you can just imagine how it would go.
Do we want to decide on our next meeting date?
Yeah.
And I know Emerson had asked specific topics. I'm assuming we want to meet again before the October joint meeting.
Yes. My only limitations are currently I'm available Wednesdays through Friday. The third Wednesday, we have a public safety committee meeting at noon, but other than that, I'm fairly open.
Thursdays are best for me.
Thursdays?
I would prefer before 1 o'clock.
Before 1. Okay.
Yeah, so like 11:30 or 11 is perfect for me.
And does this location seem to work, or, you know, coming to Eagle River or someplace even
Fine, or
closer?
last time we had it at the library meeting room or whatever.
Yeah, there's the conference room in the library building here in Eagle River.
Does that work for everybody?
We have an office there too, Paul.
Okay.
Not anymore.
That work for you?
We used to, what happened to it?
Bill and I decided if we want to meet constituents, we'd meet them here. It wouldn't
Okay.
cost taxpayers
That's your
anything.
choice.
But the conference room's fantastic. So maybe what I can do is I can talk with John Rana and just double check when the room's available. But if we can just kind of pick a date, I'll just confirm it's available.
Do we have any absences that are planned? Anybody know that you're gonna be
I
out of
think our
town?
biggest deal is looking at our, so through May, we have budget stuff, hard and heavy, so.
After May.
Well, I like
Yeah.
the idea of us meeting separately first, so, and then throw an agenda
June,
together.
July,
June, fine?
June probably over July.
We don't wanna mess with FEMA's fishing season.
I was just gonna say, oh.
They aren't coming this year anyway, so.
Yeah,
Can't use.
So I'm here on a Thursday in June at 11 o'clock in the morning at the Eagle River Library Conference Room.
Yes.
And that Thursday is to be determined right now.
If somebody can get us a date, do you have an idea?
How about June 12th?
We'll start with that. I'll
Sure.
email it out and then coordinate the responses.
It'll work.
Potential.
2 days before Flag Day.
So in the meantime, I suspect we all have our way to contact each other, so if there's no opposition to just some little dialogue to try to get us, maybe we'll rely on our planners to, maybe Ann, I don't know, to help us uncover some of these issues that we may be looking for questions on.
Some of the work's been done. A lot of the evaluation's been performed. Some of it's kind of dated. They did do a broader ridership survey back in 2009, 2010, so that's something that we can pull to the forefront out of
So
this.
if we can figure out how much that costs, if we're gonna have to do something fresh, who would do it, you know, what's that look like? And then also this idea about, you know, I agree with the independent, maybe mutual aid agreements or mutual agreements for something in it. But I'm looking at, if we're looking at an RTA, state versus nonprofit, you know, what does that concept look like, I guess?
Okay.
So if you guys have that in the plan, and I suspect there's some of that answer.
It gives us
Costs.
plenty to do.
Yes.
We'd like to see cost and
Organizational structure and versus cost.
And costs.
Yep.
what's the, I mean, there's gotta be some kind of a thought of a budget or people and.
Yeah, and that was in the study. Again, that's a couple of years old since it's dated.
So we'll go off record then, call this meeting finished.
Perfect.
Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.